Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This week I'm going to talk in this lecture about gender roles. Now, we had some discussion about gender roles in the LGBTQ week, but I want to talk more about gender roles in terms of gender stereotypes and how that can affect children. Before you get to the other issues with gender, just basic binary male and female roles and the stereotypes that come along with that. As Ladau noted, as young children are developing their gender identity, they're learning or adding to preconceived notions about their specific gender through media portrayals. And of course, books, from picture books on up, are one of the ways that students see gender identity enacted and gender roles portrayed. So as with other books, other types of diversity we've discussed this semester, girls need mirrors and windows also. And there are three kind of issues that come into play here. The number, the sheer quantity or lack thereof of representation of women and girls in books. The type of representation, what they're doing in the books. Are they, we're going to look at examples of typical female gendered roles and how that can limit readers. And also the issue of girl books versus boy books. I'm just going to touch on that one briefly. So I did a study looking at the Boston Globe Horn Book Award, which has a category for nonfiction. And I looked at the award winners and the honor books. I was focusing on picture books, and I used there's a database called the Database of Award-Winning Children's Literature, and I used that to find the books from the beginning of the nonfiction award that had been awarded either the award or the honor books. There were 126 books, 50 were picture books, 2 of them I could not get. They were older books and I just could not. I tried ILL, I even tried purchasing, could not get them. So I had a total of 48 books analyzed. And what this showed, I was looking at both gender and diversity when I was doing this study. And what this book, what I did was looked at the pictures and counted the number of times that each of these categories, white males, white females, male people of color and female people of color, interacted. So I looked at every picture and counted the number of times they interacted with technology. So this isn't strictly just male and female representations, but interacting with technology. And by technology, I also included homemaking, like if a woman was cooking on a stove, that would be interacting with technology. I had a very broad definition of technology. And what I found was the representation of white males was way above any other category. As you can see, white males had the most representations, white females second, male persons of color, and then female persons of color. And while this was my take on gender and technology, there have been other studies that look at just gender in books that find similar conclusions. And I think I'm having you read an article to that effect. I also plotted, so you can see the first books that I looked at were from 1973 and they went up to 2015. And you can see that this red line here is white males, and they have a lot more spikes, which is to be expected considering how many more times they're represented. Most of the other categories, we had a spike here for white females, a spike here for male persons of color, another spike here for white females. Sometimes what happens with all of these spikes is it's a book about the presidents. So you might have, every president represented, or it's got multiple pictures of men in it, because it's just, discussing. Or here it might be, oops, sorry, here it might be, oh gosh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry about that. There's a book, I think 2009, about 13, included a book about 13 women astronauts. So that would have upped the count a little bit. So what I found was like this example from 2005, where the boy gets to go to the moon and the sister looks on while the boy gets to experience all this. And she's just an observer. And this is what often happens is the male character, whether it's younger or older, is doing something active and something involved with technology and something exciting, while the female looks on. Although this was a nice counterpart, a bright spot, this was about 13 women who were actually in the astronaut program. And it's a good and bad thing, because they never got to become astronauts. They were they were chosen, and the NASA decided to disband that part of the astronaut program. So that was sort of a corrective, but not an entirely happy one. So there did seem to be some improvement towards the end. This is just, I cut off the end of that larger graph that I showed you here. And while white females are still in the bottom, we see that they're closer. If you go back to the original graph, you see that there's not, they're all very close in numbers, which is a nice difference, and none of them are outweighing each other. So there seems to be some hope in the last couple of years through 2015 that the numbers, and in both cases, persons of color are represented, more represented than either white males or white females. This is one of the books that did show a positive representation of white females as a scientist. This is part of the Scientists in the Field series, and this book is 2011, that's not part of it, but it's one of the positive portrayals of a woman scientist, and would have added to the number, a nice boost to the number of people that were, to the white female representation. And this one is another positive representation. This book is called Dreaming Up: A Celebration of Building, and each double page spread has a building, represents some sort of architecture from around the world, and the opposite page is children interacting in some way reflecting that architectural style. Here they're looking at the geodesic dome, and you have both the male and the female character here represented exploring hands-on with the architecture in terms of, with the manipulables. And it's nice because you also have persons of color represented. I just was getting very discouraged after reading through all of these books and having a few nice examples like this one or this one, which are again white females, and then to come upon this book, which was like, so the architecture was from all over the world, the representation was just not token. It was, every picture was balanced and showed females and males both, or if they just showed one, it might be the female, and it showed people of color. And I just was like, oh, thank goodness. It was such a nice change from the kind of depressing overview I was getting of the books when I was doing this study. So this erasure of women in books that I found here, as I said, other studies have also found this in just picture books in general, or fiction. There was another study done by DeWitt, Creedy, and Seward in 2013, and it was a sample of picture books from 1902 to 2000. There was a representative random sample of books evenly distributed over time, because what they wanted to look at was how how men's and women's roles were portrayed changed. So basically they measured like 5 different aspects, but basically mothers as homemakers and caregivers, nurturers, fathers as breadwinners and companions. And there were a couple other measures, but they particularly found with the companions and the breadwinner and mother as homemaker and caregiver that mothers were more likely to be nurturing and caregiving, and fathers were more likely to be companion and providing. And there was no significant evolution over time or change over time in these roles. They noticed a slight spike in the 1970s of father characters nurturing and providing care, but declined in subsequent time periods. So there was no statistically significant change to this traditional role of how mothers and fathers were seen in picture books. Another example of traditional roles are Disney princesses. And I'm not knocking Disney here. I like Disney as much as the next person, but you can see that many of the early princesses, and this has changed slightly with some of the later ones, but many of the early princesses were not exactly given agency or breaking stereotypes. I can't find the original person who did this in order to give credit, but it's very cynical interpretation of what the message was that these characters were giving out. So pretty girls don't even need to be alive to get some hot princely action. Sleeping Beauty. As a woman, your political worth is reduced to your marriageability. If you remember in this movie, she was supposed to be marrying somebody to make an alliance. And I think also because she wasn't supposed to be able to be the next ruler. Oops. Oh my goodness, my thing is really jumping all over. Beauty and the Beast. What's the lesson of the Beast? Appearances don't matter. What counts is what's in your heart. But of course, unless you're the girl, and then you have to be beautiful. Cinderella, if you're beautiful enough, you may be able to escape your terrible living conditions by getting a wealthy man to fall for you. And I always did think that the Little Mermaid was a terrible message, because as it says here, it's okay to abandon your family, drastically change your body, and give up your strongest talent in order to get your man. Once he sees your pretty face, only a witch's spell could draw his eyes away from you. So these are messages that could be taken away and reinforce stereotypes about being pretty and about being nurturing and about what a woman's worth is. I thought this was really interesting, that this is from Richard Scarry's Best Storybook Ever, and this is from the original 1963 edition. And you have mother at home in the kitchen. In 1991, it was updated, and now this was one of about 14 different updates that they noted. But you know that now they have father also in the kitchen helping to cook. I think it's interesting, though, that mom's still in a long dress with an apron, and dad's cooking in his suit and tie, which I just would not do that. But maybe some people do cook in their suit and tie. One place I have noticed a change is in updated fairy tales. For some reason, a lot of fairy tales have been coming. I've just been reading a lot of fairy tales. They've been coming across to my desk in different ways, and this is one that I really liked. And in this one, it's based barely. So these are updated fairy tales or retold fairy tales or fractured fairy tales. This is kind of a really fractured, numerous different fairy tales are included in this. In this one, Princess Anya sets out to help her sister. Now, her older sister's a bit flaky, but Princess Anya, the younger sister, is very a very sensible girl, very smart. And she sets out to help her sister when her sister's boyfriend is turned into a frog. She goes on a quest to find out how to turn the boyfriend back into a person and becomes known as the Frog Kisser. Along the way, she meets Snow White, who's actually Merlin from King Arthur. Roberta, a kind of Robin Hood, and the Good Witch, both of whom are strong, benevolent, dark-skinned women. There are talking royal dogs, witches, sorcerers, and magic spells, and a male librarian who turns into an owl when he's upset. So I really like this book, but you can see where it as opposed to the Disney princesses, this is giving us a different kind of fairy tale, quote-unquote, character. And I've seen if you think to Ella Enchanted, who needed to save herself, there was a movie with, Ella Enchanted was a book that was turned into a movie. There was another movie with Drew Barrymore, who was and it was a version of Cinderella where Cinderella takes charge and she's the one who actually saves herself. And then what's the one that, there's one actually where Cinderella decides that Prince Charming is really kind of a dope and doesn't really want to marry him because he's not good enough for her. So for some reason, when I think about characters who have broken the stereotypes, you see it a lot in modern fairy tales. I think because fairy tales were so traditional. I mean, think about Little Red Riding Hood. She was saved, she and her grandmother was saved by the woodcutter. And there's, many other tales where the women don't have agency and they aren't given a central role in the story except as something pretty. And even if they are given a central role, the goal is just for them to be wives. So, resources. The Amelia Bloomer book list is done by ALA, and it's named after a 19th century newspaper editor, feminist thinker, and suffragette. While she didn't create bloomers, the loose plants, it became around the end of in the 19th century, in the late 1800s, it became something that particularly suffragists and women who were feminist thinkers and women who were trying to bike, it became something to wear as kind of a statement. They were loose pants gathered at the ankles. They were still completely covered, but it was very shocking that women were wearing pants. And Amelia Bloomer did not invent these, but she did promote them, and they became associated with her. So this book list, this annual annotated book list, which provides role models of strong, capable, and creative women, was named after Amelia Bloomer. And they choose books from 0 to YA, birth through 18. And every year they come out with a list of books that they feel positively show women in a positive light. And a lot of them are nonfiction, but it's not restricted to nonfiction. It's just well-written and well-illustrated books with significant feminist content. So this is a great place to go and look for a book. It's interesting because most of these, I don't know if they have them in any order, but most of them look like nonfiction. No, Burn Baby Burn is not. So maybe it's just the order that they're putting them in. So this is a great list to take a look at to find books with strong female characters. So when girls don't see themselves in books at all, or if they don't see themselves in roles other than homemaking or caregiving, this can really limit their imaginations. And so we need to make sure we find books that give girls the needed windows and mirrors. If they don't see themselves in books in roles other than homemaking or caregiving, they can't fully explore. They're not given that roadmap to possibilities. They don't see themselves, and it's the same with other members of diverse populations. If they don't see themselves as scientists in books, then how can they don't have a roadmap for being a scientist. And the same with girls. The other thing that I said we would touch on briefly is that this idea of girls' books and boys' books. Girls are expected to read books with main characters who are male, and do all the time, while boys, we don't really tend to see them do the same. If they only read books with male main characters who get to do all the fun stuff while they watch or are the sidekick, and boys see books with feminine protagonists as not worthy of their time, it's a damaging message to girls. And of course, if they're completely erased, it's an even more damaging message. So we need to seek out books where girls are given the main role, and girls are allowed to do boyish things, step out of their gender roles. And I'm saying that, and it shouldn't, just to clarify, not that there should necessarily be boyish things and girlish things, but girls tend to step out of their gender roles, but we also need boys to step out of their gender roles and not just be the macho man, but also be seen as nurturing and a homemaker and creative and caring. And that's something that is missing from a lot of books. And we wonder how we come to this Me Too movement where men don't treat women as other than they're not nurturing, and they treat women as just something, an object, and objectify them. And if boys are not given examples of how to cross the gender lines, then it's also very damaging for them. So again, like the windows and mirrors, both sides need books that explore gender roles in a more creative and inclusive way, where people can explore what's interesting to them. And that's what I have to say about that, and I will see you on the discussion board.